a cost-saving mechanism, as a long-term solution for your benefits? What is the risk management strategy that you should be using when it comes to wellness? How are we able to identify and manage that risk long-term? And then a few examples of some case studies. So diving into ROI factor fiction is what I call it. Is there an ROI to corporate wellness programs? And if so, how do you determine that ROI? How do you really measure it, and how do you estimate what a program might do in terms of ROI and the success that it could have? So like Marcelo mentioned, we'll kind of wrap up with questions at the end. Please submit those during the webinar if you do have some, and we'll hold some time at the end. But we'll go ahead and jump in and get started. So a little background on Bravo. Not going to spend a lot of time on this kind of stuff, but just so you know where Bravo came from. Founded in 2008. Most of you probably are familiar with that being right around the time of, really the recession in the American economy. And employers were really feeling that pinch from a healthcare standpoint, from the cost of coverage standpoint, having to make some really tough decisions around their benefits, around their employment, and around their business as a whole. Are we going to continue to employ this number of people? And if so, can we continue to offer this level of benefits at the same cost that we're offering today? And so Bravo was really founded with a lot of that in mind, a lot of that mentality, and then really working with those employer groups to start driving engagement in the program and to start building a culture of health that allows them to reinvest dollars into their organization and into their long-term strategy. So you can see there below, Hero did an outside study on Bravo groups that have been with the company, been working with Bravo for at least 3 years, with an average participation rate of 77.5% engagement in the program. That really is a critical factor to everything that we're going to talk about today, and really because you need to get those folks to engage, and that's obviously step number one. Hurdle number one is what I call it with the wellness program. How do you get people to actually show up, engage in the program? And we'll talk about that a little bit today. $86 million generated in funds that are reinvested into the employees and into the employee programs. We'll talk about that today when we get into how wellness is a benefit solution, how we can help you build a cost-neutral program, and potentially how we could build out a budget where you're actually having some cost savings that you could reinvest in your program. And we would really recommend reinvesting in things that maybe you've always wanted to do for your employees, or things that your employees have asked for or shown an interest in. Some examples are things like standing desks, things like community bicycles. Some of the employers we work with have done things like that, where they've actually gone out and purchased a handful of bicycles that folks can use on their lunch break or different times or after work, and be able to go on a bike ride and then bring that back. And then the last point there, 4+ years, about half of our clients, more than half of our clients have been with Bravo for 4+ years. We really do view wellness as a long-term strategy. That doesn't mean that you should just wait until year 4 to start measuring success and seeing if your wellness program is working. Doesn't mean that there are not important factors and important milestones that can be achieved in the first 2 to 3 years of the program. But we really don't think that wellness can be a 1-year strategy. If you're going into it saying, hey, we're going to give this a shot for 1 year. If we lower our claims, we'll keep doing it. If we don't, we're going to get rid of it. I think that's kind of taking a little bit of a short-sighted approach to the impact that wellness can have on your organization. So a little more background on Bravo. Our CEO and founder, Jim Pishak. Not going to spend a lot of time on Jim, but really I think the important thing to know about Jim is that he's very dialed into not only what's going on within the wellness space, but importantly what's going on within the regulations and compliance aspect of wellness programs. So certainly as you look at implementing a program for your employees, you always want to be cognizant of what are the regulations, how are they changing, how do they impact me as an organization, how do I balance what I might hear from the Affordable Care Act to what I'm hearing from the Department of Labor, from the ADA, ERISA, EEOC, all the fun 3- and 4-letter government agencies that are somehow tied into these employee wellness programs. Now, certainly the Affordable Care Act is kind of the standard bearer. It's the one that was the wellness regulations that are part of the Affordable Care Act were approved by Congress, and they are kind of the baseline for making those big decisions about your program. But there are many other regulations that have an impact. So we'll talk a little bit about that, and specifically the EEOC and where that may go. But Jim has been very dialed into that, spends a lot of time in Washington working with those folks to understand and influence what's going to happen with those regulations. How do we continue to build out meaningful programs that impact employees and also the organizations they work for? Just a little more background on kind of our ideology. So I mentioned Jim and talked a little bit about him. He is a guest author as part of the Health Promotion in the Workplace. Michael O'Donnell is the primary author on this book. I'm not assuming many of you have it sitting around, as it's about 1,000 pages, it seems like. Good paperweight if you need to pick it up. But it's a great read, and it really dives into the research behind health promotion in the workplace. And Michael is a board member at Bravo, and we've really taken on a lot of his mentality in terms of driving engagement and driving results. So looking at things like awareness, motivation, skills, and opportunity fits into what we call our proven process. So I'm not going to get into that today because I want to dive into some of the more meaningful ROI and cost reduction and risk reduction topics. But that really does drive a lot of our framework for the decisions we make, the way we design our programs, and the way that we would work with an employer, work with your organization to implement a program. A little more background on Bravo and what we really focus on. So we talked about the ideology. Bravo, at the core, our goal is to inspire people to achieve their personal best. And so that could be through motivation intrinsically, or it could be through motivation extrinsically. And certainly if you're an organization that has worked on your culture of health for a few years, you have a wellness committee, your leadership team is bought into the idea of health and wellness, a lot of that motivation can come intrinsically as part of the organization as they feel that support from the organization. Back in 2008, we worked with a lot of employers who didn't have a culture of health. They were new to wellness. They were manufacturers, even hospital systems, were not doing a lot around organized wellness. And so, a lot of the initial kind of inspiration had to come from extrinsic motivation. And so what are most people motivated by? Well, they're motivated by money or time. Could be time off, could be money in their paycheck, could be money in their HSA, a reward card. A lot of different things motivate folks. And we've had 10 years now of research on what are the things that really do motivate people extrinsically, and where is that tipping point between it's enough but not too much. Along those lines, our three primary goals in what we help organizations solve, what we help organizations do, is control healthcare costs, number one. I believe, and that's why I got into the wellness space, I believe that is the primary goal initially of a wellness program. And there certainly are many others, and you can see the other two here. But controlling healthcare costs is typically the number one motivating factor. Number two, inspire that personal improvement. We talked about that. Helping the individual. We know that a lot of folks want to improve their health. They may not have the means, they may not have the resources, they may not have the right motivation to make the changes. Those changes are tough. Long-lasting lifestyle changes are difficult. They're not easy to do, or else everyone would do it. And so helping inspire folks to make that improvement. And then last, keeping and making benefits a competitive advantage. Really ties into attracting and retaining top talent so that you can continue to offer excellent benefits at an affordable rate, all while fitting into your budget. So the first step we talked about was wellness as a benefit solution. And so, that's not something that I think typically folks are thinking about when they think about wellness. Typically, and maybe you're familiar with a lot of this, is that when you hear the phrase wellness or the term wellness, it could mean hundreds, if not thousands of different things. So that could mean we're offering yoga classes at lunch. It could mean we're doing Weight Watchers. We have a walking program. It could mean we do, fun organizational challenges. It could be things like we donate our time to charity. There's a lot of different elements to a wellness program. But Bravo takes a little bit of a strategic approach to how does that wellness strategy fit into your overall benefit strategy. So, the first thing we start with is what comes to mind when you hear open enrollment. I know that's something we're always thinking about, something we're always looking forward to, in quotation marks, every year is open enrollment time. Well, if you're like most of the employers that we work with, you might look a little bit like this. when you start thinking about open enrollment. You start thinking about the questions that you need to answer, changes that potentially need to be made to your health plan during open enrollment. And you're maybe asking yourself some of these types of questions. Who should we cover? Do we need to change who we cover in order to control our cost? What should we cover? Do we want to offer different services? Do we need to limit our service, expand our services? Should we shift premiums? Do we change the percentage of premium that an employee is paying? Change deductibles, change co-pays, move to a skinny network. All the questions that you are working with your consultant on every year to figure out, what do we do with these things in order to control our cost? So I always like to throw a little humor in there. Tell me if this sounds familiar. Now we know why it's called open enrollment. Folks just lining up, opening their purse, opening their wallet. How much do I owe you? Many times that is the same way that you're approaching it as an employer. You're going back to your health insurer, you're going back to your health plan saying, how much do I owe you? What's the new rate? What's the new increase? Most of the employers that come to Bravo and work with Bravo, they're seeing 10, 12, 15% increases year over year. Basically, open your wallet and just let me know what you're going to take. Why? Well, the data tells us to expect increases every year. We've gotten to a place where you pretty much come to expect that. If you have a year where you don't have an increase, if you have a year where you remain flat in your claims trend, or if you have a small increase, A, you probably have a really good consultant, which is great, and B, that you've avoided really what is the trend, and you've avoided really what's going on within healthcare and within health insurance across the country. How do I know that? Well, if you look at these risk factors, and this was a study done this was a document produced by Aon Hewitt in 2012, but these are anything that was true in 2012, and that's why I continue to use this slide, is even more true today. The data would tell you that the percentages are only going up for what these 15 chronic conditions are contributing to. So you look at these 8 risk factors, things like poor diet, physical inactivity, poor standard of care, poor stress management. Those risk factors lead to these chronic conditions. Diabetes being number one. That is the number one cost center in terms of chronic conditions, in terms of chronic risk. Heart disease, hypertension, obesity. You can see a lot of the things on here, depression, high cholesterol. You can see a lot of the things that are on here, many of which are caused by those risk factors, by those lifestyle choices, behavior choices. Those 15 chronic conditions account for 80% of the total cost for chronic illness worldwide. So when you look at your open enrollment, when you look at your renewals and you wonder why are the costs still going up, it's because they're still being driven large part. And if you're fully insured, you're getting somewhat group rated. If you're self-funded, you're getting true claims. But a lot of it's being driven by these risk factors and these chronic conditions. And yet, a lot of times the employers who come to work with us have continued to use the same levers year over year to try to impact and control those costs. So instead of dealing with potential root causes, we continue to make changes to some of the end result things that can control costs, that can bring immediate cost savings. So again, some of those questions that we looked at: who's covered? Where do we provide coverage? How much is covered? How much do we subsidize? Those are the typical levers that you're pulling every year, and you're playing that tightrope walk, that impact on culture versus that impact on budget. If we change who's covered, it might help our budget, but it might impact our culture. We may have a negative impact on culture if we start telling people you can't have your spouse is on the health plan if they can take coverage elsewhere. You're certainly able to do that as an employer, but that could impact your culture. If you increase the benefits and allow for more coverage or provide new benefits, that may have a really great impact on culture, but it will negatively impact your budget. And so as you pull those levers and adjust those different questions and different pieces to your benefits every year, you may be able to control costs in the short term, but we really want to take a much longer term approach to wellness and to benefits and how wellness can help impact that. And again, a little bit more humor here. typically what we see, and I'll go back just for a second, typically what we see is you're having these conversations about your open enrollment, these conversations about your insurance, and these conversations about your budget and cost. Then whatever you have left over, whatever budget's been set aside for wellness after you've made all those decisions, that's typically then what's being contributed to putting in a wellness program, which is typically why many employers come to us and they're in their third straight year of saying, we want to do a wellness program, we just haven't done it yet. Or, we put it off last year again, and we really know we need to do it. How do we get started? Because typically there's not enough budget left over to put in a meaningful program. At Bravo, we think that there has to be a better way to impact cost. We think that there has to be a better way to impact your future claims, certainly, and we'll get into that, but also the way that you impact your overall benefit structure, the way you impact your decisions during open enrollment. We think that a comprehensive, well-designed wellness program can be a part of that discussion and can impact the cost of your health insurance and not just the claims on the back end. So what do I mean by that? Well, Bravo has a financial modeling tool. It's a proprietary tool. We have an actuary that built this tool for us, and it allows us to go in, take your specific rates. So it could be last year's rates, and we can make some assumptions, but take your specific rates for employee only, employee plus spouse, employee plus family rates. We can put those into this tool, and then we can put in a plan design, a wellness program design that could be participation based, but certainly as you look at potentially moving to what we would call our best practice programs, which are typically our outcomes or improvement based programs. That's where we can get really scientific and make some really good educated guesses about how many people would engage in this program based on what we're looking at from an incentive standpoint. How many might not only engage, but how many might meet the goals or show a health improvement or participate in activities, whatever those might be, and come up with a full estimate based on our 10 years of data on how many people are going to pass and how many people are not going to pass these different goals. We would put in presumed dollar amounts, and we could then be able to show you how to build a cost-neutral program by adjusting these different levers instead of adjusting some of the levers you have in the past. So we might go in and say, well, you're thinking about making a wellness program a discount off premium. That's typically what an employer would love to do. If they've got a budget for it, hey, we're going to set aside, we're going to give everyone $200 off their premium rate for next year if they engage in a screening and a health assessment, if they meet a blood pressure goal, BMI goal, tobacco goal, we're going to give them $200 off premium. We can model that out for you and show you, well, if you ran it that way and you did a $200 reduction in premium, here's what your cost is going to be. And it's pretty astronomical when you actually look at it. I mean, if you do a straight discount, you're talking typically for most employers we work with hundreds of thousands of dollars that they're basically giving out in an incentive for folks that engage in the program. So we might look at that, sit down with your CFO and say, that's too much. We can't afford to do that from a budget standpoint. So maybe we go back in and we say, well, you can earn $200 off your premium, but there was an increase this year, so everyone's getting a $100 increase, but you could earn $200 off by engaging in the wellness program and meeting goals. And so then we could model that out for you and show you, well, if everyone's premium went up by 100 and then you could earn up to 200 back, here's what it might look like. And then the last step would be, hey, we could show you if you did a $200 increase and everyone had to do these wellness activities and meet these goals in order to earn that full 200 or avoid that $200 increase, here's what it would look like for you as an organization from a budget standpoint. And typically, again, you're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars in difference just based on the way that you structure that incentive. So here's an example of what I mean, and we'd be happy to run one of these financial models for you, but here's an example of what I mean. So this is just a sample of 1,000 life group. So they have 1,000 folks who are going through the program. We'll just say 1,000 employees who are going through the program. Year one is a participation-based program. Year two would be results-based or improvement-based. And so this may be a little tough to follow. I always try to kind of keep it simple, keep it easy to understand. But in this case, based on the way that their benefits are set up, we went back and presented and worked with them to set up a new contribution strategy that basically said, listen, our rates went up by 10% this year. So everyone is getting an increase of $100 per month to your premium. But if you do the wellness activities, if you engage in the program, and in year one, all you got to do is do a screening, do a health assessment, maybe participate in some team challenges. It could be tobacco. You could add a tobacco credit in, so you've got to be tobacco free or complete a tobacco cessation course. If you do those things, we're going to pay that as the organization. We're going to take on that $100 increase. You won't pay any additional dollars for your health insurance this year as long as you're doing the wellness activities. So for this employer, that increase generated about $1.2 million that wouldn't have been there if they had just said, we're not going to have that $100 increase. Everyone's going to pay the same as they did last year. The idea is to give that $1.2 million back. You want everyone to engage, everyone to meet goals. That's the hope. That's the dream. That's, you know, what the ideal state would be. We all know that not everyone is going to engage in the program, and not everyone's going to meet goals or be tobacco free or complete a cessation course. So in this case, this employer ended up paying out about $582,000 in year one for participation-based incentives. That means you did a screening, you did a health assessment. They paid out about $522,000 for what we would call outcomes-based incentives. This was a tobacco credit. So if you are not a non-tobacco user or you complete a tobacco cessation course, you would earn an additional incentive. Total dollars paid out based on those folks that engaged was about 1.1 million and change, 1.1 million and 4,000 in total incentives basically paid out. So the majority of that 1.2 million got paid back out. Employees didn't have to pay any more for their insurance for the most part. But because some people didn't engage, because some people were tobacco users and they chose not to complete the tobacco cessation course, the company actually saved about $95,000 in total net change to their contributions. The cost for Bravo for the program, screenings, the admin fee, a coaching program, all of that kind of combined was a little over $100,000 in total cost for the program. Once everything was done, everyone had engaged. So the total net financial impact after all of the wellness activities are paid for and after all of the incentives are paid out was just under $5,000 in total extra budget, extra cost that this organization needed for their wellness program. Now, as you move into year two, you can obviously see now that same strategy, same approach, $100 more per year, but instead of tying those incentives to participation in year two, this employer tied all of those incentives to outcomes, to meeting goals or showing health improvement. As a result, they paid out less, fewer people met all of the goals, and we can model this out to you to show you, how many people would meet the goals and what percentage would meet all of the goals or half of the goals. And their total net change in year two was about $306,000 that they didn't pay back out because people didn't meet those goals. Total Bravo costs were a little more because we're tracking outcomes. There were additional tools, about $120,000. And at the end of the day, they were left with a $186,000 budget surplus because of this program that could now be either reinvested in the organization for pressing needs or reinvested in the organization for additional wellness resources, standing desks, bikes, gym memberships, whatever it is that $186,000 can cover. Now, if you're the CFO, you're going, this is great. This is perfect. We just paid for our entire wellness program and we have $186,000 left over. This is fantastic. I'm going to take the money and run. If you're the HR director, you're probably looking at that going, that wasn't necessarily the goal. to have a huge surplus. You know, we wanted to make sure that people are meeting goals and earning that incentive and not paying more for their insurance. And so, you know, we could go back and model that out and say, well, what if we made it easier for people to meet the blood pressure goal? What if instead of 120/80, we move that blood pressure goal to 130/85? And that's where this tool comes into place. We can just adjust those numbers and it will change that bottom number here. It'll change that 186. So maybe we go back in, we make it easier, we come back, and now we're down to $50,000 in surplus. So we can continue to kind of play with that number to get to a place where it makes the most sense for you as an organization. It covers the cost of your wellness program, your incentives, and then depending on, you know, what your goals are, leaves you with a budget or a small net financial cost, whatever fits into your wellness budget. So again, we can run an actual model for you and use the tool, working with the folks at WeAreWellness, and be able to kind of run that for you. You can request that through Marcelo and his team, and then we'd be happy to put one of those together for you, or at least show you what a sample might look like. So that's our first approach to wellness ROI. You know, if you want to design a program like that, a cost-neutral program, or a program that has those additional dollars in surplus, we can absolutely do that. We've had a few large manufacturers historically that came to us and said, we need to save X amount of dollars on our health insurance. One large employer we work with said, we got to save $1 million on our health insurance. Now, this is 2009, 2008. They said, we got to save $1 million on our health insurance. So we went in and built a program like that, that showed them how we could get to $1 million in terms of their surplus. And now they've done a lot with that. You know, since 2009, they've shifted a lot more towards, let's reinvest that. Let's make it easier for people to engage. You know, we're in a better economy. We need to attract and retain our employees. Let's make this program more fun. There's certainly a lot of strategies that we can take to develop that, but it just shows you what could potentially be possible. So there is a potential front-end ROI to the program based on the way we structure the benefits, but certainly the long-term ROI, you know, where we focus, where we would say, yes, your program is successful, and yes, you have really had an impact on your overall cost, is in that risk management. And how do we start to bring the risks down? We go back to those health factors and those risks that are contributing to 80% of the costs. How do we start to address those risks? Because certainly the dollars tied to that are going to be a lot higher. The savings tied to that are going to be a lot higher than simply the way we design your benefit structure. So looking at that, I'll focus in on one specific health risk. So diabetes, I mentioned earlier, it's the #1 driver of cost on your health plan in terms of lifestyle and chronic disease risk-related cost. This is a map of the United States in 1994. It shows prevalence of those folks in the United States that are diagnosed with diabetes. So U.S. adults diagnosed with diabetes. Color code in that bottom left-hand corner would tell you that the majority of states are in that light yellow, tannish color. That means under 4.5% of that state's population has been diagnosed with diabetes. The darker orange, you can see kind of in the southeast area of the United States, Midwest area of the United States, into Texas. You can see spattered throughout, though. There's some areas in the Northeast as well. You know, even some states that are in the Great Plains and out west that are in that next phase. They're in that 4.5% to almost 6% now of their population are diabetics, of their adult population are diabetics. And then one state you can see at this point was over that 6% threshold. So 1994, one state over 6%. Let's fast forward 10 years. This is 10 years later, 2004. This is coming from the CDC has presented this data. You look at 10 years later, there were no states in 1994 that were in the red. Everyone's in the orange, light orange, yellowish color. By 2004, you can see that there are no states in America that are left in, except for I think Alaska, that are left in that under 4.5%. Everyone's moved into that 4.5% and up state. you can see that the majority of the country is now into above 6%. You've got states like California and Texas and Oklahoma and Tennessee and states in the Southeast that are now above 7.5%. And you're starting to see the first states now that there's 2 states now that have over 9% of their population, of their U.S. adult population, that is diabetic. Fast forward 10 more years, I think you guys kind of get the idea. This is what the country looked like in 2014. The vast majority of states over 9% with their diabetes risk. So when you think about why costs are going up, easy to see in a 20-year period, the number of states that were under 4.5% in 1994, that by 2014 were over 9% in their number of adults with diabetes. So growing trend, it's not slowing down anytime soon. I could show you that the projected map for 2024, but I don't think we'd want to see that at this point. So, hopefully we can do something to start addressing not only diabetes, but I could show you the same maps. They did the same exact thing for obesity. They look identical. So as diabetes risk goes up, obesity risk, hypertension, there is certainly a growing epidemic. You can see here, and this is a few years ago, 61% of Americans are overweight, half are termed obese. So it's not just diabetes. We're seeing a huge epidemic with obesity, a huge epidemic with hypertension and high blood pressure as well. I call this the scary truth. So this is the scary truth about some of the statistics tied to those health risks. So there's about 12% of adults in the U.S. have diabetes, and they don't even know that they have diabetes because they're not going to their doctor. They're not having their annual preventive visits. They're not adhering to their medication. They don't even know they need medication at this point. So imagine what having these undiagnosed diabetics, what that's doing to them as individuals in terms of their health, their body, their cost, potential future cost, and then certainly for you as an organization, having folks that are on your health plan who are diabetic and they're undiagnosed and they're not getting the right treatment. 37% of adults are pre-diabetic, and almost 90% of those folks who are pre-diabetic don't know that they're pre-diabetic. Those are the folks that are your future cost drivers. They may not have filed a claim yet because they're not a diabetic. They haven't had a ton of the diabetic symptoms, but they are on their way to becoming a diabetic. I saw a study recently that said about 6% of all folks who are pre-diabetic this year will move into a diabetic state next year. So we're all kind of heading down that path if we're in that chronic disease state. Now you can see some of the others on here. 29% of adults have hypertension, and more than half of those folks don't know it. Again, what's the root cause? We're not seeing our primary care doctor. We're not getting an annual physical. We're not getting an annual biometric screening. 45% of adult men don't have a primary care doctor. So there's a lot of factors that are leading to these hidden risks. But I thought this next one was interesting, that 88% of Americans, according to USA Today, indicated that they would rather be healthy than rich, but only 37% of those folks expect to be in good health in 10 years. So that is a big focus of our programs when we talk about risk identification and risk reduction. These are the real scary facts, the scary truth, about where folks are headed, where folks on your health plan are headed. We talked about this, just flashing back to, risks and behaviors, but getting a little more specific with it. 75% of claims are related to preventable disease and lifestyle choices. We focus in on these 5, because it's what the Affordable Care Act and many of the governing regulations allow you to focus on, but B, typically these are the risk factors that are driving the majority of claims on your health plan in terms of those that are lifestyle related, preventable disease, chronic diseases, and chronic disease risks. So obesity, blood pressure, cholesterol, tobacco, and glucose. And you can see here, these are estimates, and there's some data available and studies on all of these speaking to, what does someone who is obese cost you compared to someone who's not? And certainly for themselves as well. But what does somebody who has hypertension or high blood pressure cost in their organization compared to someone who doesn't, or somebody who has high cholesterol, or someone who's a tobacco user? Glucose, I think that one's incredibly low. I saw another study recently that said, on average, someone who is a diabetic, if they are at that point where they are into being a diabetic, they cost you about $8,000 more annually than someone who is not a diabetic. So certainly that's factoring in pre-diabetes and elevated glucose levels and things like that. But you can start to see the costs associated with these health risks, with these chronic disease risks. And certainly, you know, as you start adding them together, you're typically not going to find one without the other. You're going to start to see clusters of, I've got diabetes or pre-diabetes, but I've also got high blood pressure, and I'm also obese. I'm also a tobacco user, or I have high cholesterol. You know, those things really start to cluster together when you get into the risk factors. So the question then becomes, well, what are we doing about it? We get it. You know, we're in agreement that those risk factors are causing disease, that are causing the costs on our plan to go up, that are causing the cost for our employees to go up. So what are we doing about it? Well, you know, what Bravo really does is focus heavily on those specific factors. So we talked about what we would call outcomes-based wellness programs. I know they've been around for years. Bravo was really at the forefront of that in 2008. But what we've realized and where we have developed and evolved our program over time is really focusing on health improvement. So it's not so much important that everybody meets a biometric goal, because that's not necessarily realistic. We really want to focus on, are you making health improvement over year? Are you reducing your risk for chronic disease? And so this comes from one of our aggregate reports. We call it our migration chart. Each of our employers will get one of these at the end of the year, and it shows them a number of folks that went through the program. So we do total population. We'll also do cohort. I think the cohort population is the one that I always find to be incredibly interesting and important for your organization. So it's going to take just the folks that went through the program last year, measure the number of chronic disease risk factors that they had a year ago, and then come back and show you where they are today. So a good example, we'll just focus in on the folks that had 3 risk factors. So down the left-hand side, scroll down to where you see 3. Next to that shows the number of folks that had 3. So a year ago, there were 578 individuals in this organization that had 3 risk factors. That means they're at risk for 3 of those risk factors below. They're obese, they're a tobacco user, and they have high blood pressure. Or they're diabetic or pre-diabetic, they have hypertension, and they're overweight. 3 risk factors. Those are the folks that we would say, when you get into comorbidities, 2, 3, 4, 5 risk factors, those are the folks that it's not if they're going to drive costs, it's when they're going to drive costs on your plan. And so let's look at those folks with 3 risk factors. A year ago, 578. Scroll over to the middle, that gray box under 3. You'll see that a year later, there are only 181 of those folks, of those 578, who still have 3 risk factors. 269 have moved to 2, 96 have moved to 1, and 3 people actually went from having 3 risk factors a year ago down to 0. You can see that 29 people got worse. 29 people went from 181, 29 people went from 3 to 4 risk factors. 249 people went from 2 to 3 risk factors. That's typically what you're going to see with, if you were to pull one of these for your organization with no wellness program in place, you're typically just going to see people moving into the red. Our goal, the way we design our programs, is how do we get folks to move into the green? Certainly it's in the incentive structure. So we talked about the improvement, and it's making sure that that improvement is attainable, it's meaningful, but it feels fair, and it feels like something that, even if I'm not in a healthy state, I can make improvement. I could improve my blood pressure enough to earn the incentive, versus somebody who might look at a program, if you were an employer and you set your goal and said, hey, we want everyone to be a 120/80, or else you're not going to get the incentive. You're going to have a lot of folks that are in that level 3, level 4, level 5, look at that program and say, I'm out. There's no way I can do it. That's not me. This program's not for me. And that's where you start to get into, hey, why are you doing this to me? instead of why are you doing this for me? Our programs focus on, hey, if you're a 165 over 105 blood pressure, we're not going to ask you to be a 120 over 80. It's not realistic. You're going to tap out. But could you go from being level 4 to level 3? Could you go from being prehypertension stage 2 to prehypertension stage 1? Because we know that most people in prehypertension stage 2 are going to be moving the opposite direction. They're going to be moving towards hypertension. So we want to get people encouraged, motivated, and again, it could be intrinsic. Hey, we've got a great culture of health. We are bringing a health coach out. We're doing all these types. We have a Weight Watchers program, and we're doing this to help you. Could be extrinsic. You know, we're going to reward you financially for improving your health, for moving from prehypertension stage 2 to prehypertension stage 1. So last thing I'll focus on here, because we can get into this all day on how do you design these programs. But really, it's about putting meaningful incentives in place. So again, if you have a great culture of health, your incentives may not need to be as meaningful. You know, if you have a great method of communication and your employees read every email you send out and they respond to all of the corporate messaging, then you may not need as significant of an incentive. But typically, most employers, we would say, that we're seeing success with are using that probably 500 to 1,500 range in terms of their annual incentive for engaging in the program. Now, what you're seeing here on the screen is an example of an adjusted program. So certainly there's been some changes, potential changes to the EEOC. And so Bravo has actually gone out and designed some new programs that can accommodate those changes, potential vacation of rules by the EEOC, but also keep a meaningful program in place, allow you to see some of those continued success stories, see some of that continued risk reduction based on the way that we design the program. But important that, you know, in addition to goals, in addition to improvement, you're providing your employees with tools. So coaching, team challenges, online courses, recipes, workout videos, whatever that might look like. Bravo has a lot of that baked into the program. You may have some of that already, but it's important. We've realized over the last 10 years, that people are far more successful in this program and making the improvement they need to make when they have additional support and they have additional tools. So I'm going to wrap up with a couple of case studies. I know we've only got about 15 minutes left. I wanted to leave a few minutes at the end for questions. So I'm going to jump into a couple case studies. These are published case studies. You can go on bravowell.com and actually download these case studies if you're interested in reading more. My favorite line, though, when I look at these case studies is it's not magic, it's math. I have folks all the time ask me, you know, does wellness work? You know, is there an ROI? Is it successful? We've seen studies that tell us it's not successful, or we've seen articles saying that it doesn't have an ROI. You know, how do you respond to that? And my response is always the same. It's not magic, it's math. If you don't put the right type of program, the right type of incentives, the right type of rewards in place, if you aren't measuring the right type of activity and improvement, then it's not magically going to lead to an ROI. Just doing a wellness program isn't automatically going to mean your claims are going to come down. It doesn't automatically mean that folks with 3-4 risk factors are going to suddenly reduce those risk factors. It really comes down to putting in a meaningful program that gets folks to A, see their doctor or participate in an annual screening, and B, at some point, whether that's year 1, 2, 3, you've got to start rewarding them for the behavior that you're trying to accomplish, which is, in our case, health improvement. And so you can mix in a lot of other things to a successful program. There's a lot of different elements, but that's really the key. So one example of a case study is a company called Valio. They've been a long-term client of Bravo's. I believe they started maybe in 2009. And Valio was in a place where they're a manufacturing company. They've got a few different locations around the country, but their primary locations are in Indiana and Michigan. So I believe they do manufacturing of equipment and glass for vehicles. And Valio has been with Bravo for 7 years. They see about a 75% participation rate over the course of those 7 years. So that has gone up, basically recently. I think it's over 80% now that they've seen in the program, but certainly you're going to have that, from time to time as you go over time, you'll see an improvement in that engagement. And over this span, they've seen a negative claims trend as a result of this program. Now, how did we get to that place? Well, I'll show you a little bit of how we got to that place. So Valio came to Bravo and basically said, well, we think this is a good idea, but we're not sure that it really works. So what we want to do is we want to test the validity of this program with one of our locations, which was the location in Indiana, about 1,500 people, similar demographics, age, all of that. And they're not going to run that program for the folks at the Michigan location. Again, 1,500 people, similar demographic, similar population, age, gender, all that. And they did this from 2009 to 2013. So that for 4 years, they ran the wellness program, and this was a Bravo Strong improvement-based wellness program that they ran, because they called it internally Healthy Rewards. They ran this program from 2009 to 2013 at their lighting division in Indiana. Same time frame, they did not run that program. They did not run a wellness program at the Michigan plant, Michigan location. And what you can see here was over a 4-year span, the folks at the Indiana location who were doing the program trended at 2.5%, while the folks at the Michigan location continued to trend at 10.25%. So at that time they were going even over what was the national projection or the national trend for what their increase might be. And so after about 4 years of doing this program and seeing the success with one location and seeing the other location continue to perform poorly in terms of their claims, they decided obviously to engage the program with their entire location. And so in 2013, they started to offer the wellness program, the Healthy Rewards program, to their entire population, both locations. And since that point, they've seen a basically flat or steady claims trend. So you can see the black line being kind of where they were projected, the green line being where they ended up, and the cost savings that would be associated with that from a medical and RX claim standpoint. So again, you can download this case study from our website, but it's one of the case studies that's out there. One other one, it's always great to have the personal stories. There's some of that in there as well, folks who actually made improvement. Here was the HR director from Valio, who was a big part of the program. She went through the program with the employees, started a journey to live healthy, started walking every day, taking her dog on a walk every day, spending more time outside. As a result, she lost 60 pounds, and her lab lost 18 pounds. So, we typically don't do wellness programs for pets, but, there could be some good side effects as well. Got time for one more. I won't spend as much time on this. Graco is another published case study that we have that you can download. They won the C. Everett Koop Award, honorable mention runner-up, I think, to Dell a couple years ago. And they're a program that has done the Bravo Strong program, improvement program for years, but they've also added in a lot of their own resources. They offer walking programs and Weight Watchers, and they do gym reimbursements and a lot of the stuff that they think really matters and has been successful with their employees. But 93% of the folks who didn't meet the goals, and I don't like the way that's worded. It says that it's auto applied. What it really means is 93% of the folks that didn't meet the biometric goals were able to go out and earn the incentive by improving their health. So they're seeing a dramatic improvement in their health across the organization, and have been able to trend to beat the industry trend by 2 percentage points in their claims for the last, I think we're going up on nine years with them that we've been working with Graco. So again, how do we know that they're trending better? Where does that come from? Again, we would look at their migration chart. So We'll pull a full migration chart. This shows actually from the beginning of the program in 2009 to where they are today, 2017. You can see that, where they are today, they have nobody who still has, who's gone into the red that was in three risk factors. They've had one person who had 2 go to 3, but the majority of folks have improved their health over the last 8-9 years. We would also run one of these each year, so we would look at just 2016 to 2017 and show improvement in the program. But this is where I say it's not magic, it's math. If you look at your population and folks are not moving into the green, and you see folks, I'll flash forward, you see folks moving into the red, if you see a lot of your folks going that direction, no, I don't believe that you'll see a lot of ROI in your program. It's typically when you're seeing folks actually getting healthier. So again, you can download those case studies. There's a few more online, but I'm going to go ahead and kind of pause there. I'll let Marcelo jump in if there's any questions that we can go through here in the last couple minutes.
Thank you, Brandon. That was awesome. A lot of really good information there. So yeah, if anybody does have any questions, go ahead and type those into the chat box. Now would be the time. We did have a couple questions come in. Is there a minimum number of employees needed to get started with Bravo Wellness?
Yeah, great question. So certainly, obviously, you're going to have more impact on your future claims trend and things like that if you're a self-funded employer. With fully insured, we do work with a number of fully insured clients. We have a number of fully insured blocks of business that we work with. Obviously, a little bit less impact, as some of that's going to be group rated. But typically, I would say, we work best with 100 employees or more. We do have a small group product that we've built, very easy to use. It has a flat monthly fee, so there's no per-eligible fee, any of that kind of stuff. It's a flat monthly rate. If you're under 250 employees, you can have access to this program. It includes most of the same benefits as our standard program. It's just that there's a few less kind of customization options, just from a streamlining process. But yeah, I would say typically 100 plus. The majority of our clients who are really seeing a reduction in their claims and being able to track that are probably in that, above that 250 mark. But we certainly have clients, and we've had clients under that 100 mark as well. But from a cost standpoint, typically 100 plus is where it makes the most sense.
Okay, great. Thank you. We had a couple more questions roll in as you were answering that one there. One person is asking, isn't it invasive to have these statistics for small companies under 40 employees? Yeah, I mean, so the thresholds for what you can do under 50 employees definitely vary by state. So that's part of it as well, why we typically say 100 plus. It doesn't mean you can't do some of these things. You could certainly put in a very meaningful wellness program with tools and resources and offer, on-site screenings or just do a physician program. A lot of our smaller employers will do programs where really they're going to just incentivize folks to go to the doctor. So we just want you to go see your physician every year because we know 45% of adult males don't have one, and other adult females as well are not seeing their primary care doctor for a annual screening or physical. So a lot of smaller employers won't focus so much on meeting goals and things like that out of the gate. It's more about, hey, we just want you to go see your doctor. If you went and saw your doctor, we'll give you a reward, we'll give you an incentive for that. But yeah, there's some limitations under 50, and then under 25, we don't provide this type of level of reporting for groups under 25 because, exactly to your point, it could be viewed as invasive knowing, there's only 25 or 20 employees at this organization, and you could start to kind of look at, hey, who's who, those types of things. So we definitely pay attention to that, try to keep, certainly make sure we're keeping everyone's PHI private and HIPAA compliant. Perfect. Thank you for clearing that up. In your chart that's on the screen right now, how do you show new employees that are coming into the company? Are they reflected in those numbers? Yeah, typically they won't be reflected until, so I guess there's two ways to say that. So we'll do a total population migration chart, but if they only have 1 year of data, they're typically not going to be included in that. So
we would include them in the overall profile that we provide from a reporting standpoint. So it'll show how many folks are at risk for obesity or hypertension or diabetes, and they would be included in that if they're at risk. But we wouldn't have any kind of measurement to kind of base that improvement or non-improvement on. So yeah, so typically you're looking at a new employee comes in, they can engage in the program, we're going to capture their data, they're going to get a report that says here's what here's what your health looks like and some of the concerns with your health. But then typically we're going to wait until year 2 to capture their kind of improvement or where are they at from a risk standpoint, because now we've got 2 points of data. Again, that's why I say it's really not a one-year strategy, because if you're not at least looking at a second screening, a second data point, it's really hard to tell just by looking at claims after 1 year to say, yes, it worked or no, it didn't. You might have folks getting healthier who were going to be a claim that didn't file a claim because they did get healthier. So there's some, there's a lot of factors there. That's why I always say it's a 2, 3, 4 year strategy that you have to kind of commit to, and then find the right consultant, the right partner to help you set that strategy, so that you can really measure success.
Okay, great. We have one more here. How do you charge for services? Is it fee for service or PEPM?
Yeah, thanks. Another good question. So again, the under 250 life, that kind of what we would call our small group product, is going to be a monthly flat fee. So, any employees or spouses who want to engage in the program, there's a monthly fee. And again, it depends on kind of what you choose and those types of things, but it's a monthly fee that the organization pays, and there's no per eligible fee. For large groups that are over 250, it's typically a per eligible per month fee, and that gives you access to basically the full program administration. So that includes communication strategy, that includes a co-branded web portal. It includes reporting and tracking and all the tools and resources that are available on the portal. The only thing that's not included in that typically is the actual biometric screening. So we do charge a per participant for the screening. So, if you want to do on-site screenings, we would only charge for the folks that actually come in and do a screening, get their screening done and get their results back. And so we could run an estimate. Again, that's what that financial modeling tool is for. We could run an estimate that says that based on your incentive, your demographics, your background, here's what we estimate based on our 10 years of data. Here's what we project in terms of how many folks we think will actually do a screening, and be able to then make some pretty educated guesses about what the total cost of your program might look like.
All right. And are you guys collecting analytic data, or is the data fed to you from existing tools like Deerwalk or Springbok?
Yeah, it kind of depends. So if we're collecting any types of claims data, that's typically coming through, a current data organization or coming from the health plan. All depends on where that data, where we're able to get that data. If we're talking about the biometric screening data that you're seeing here, we're collecting all that ourselves. So we would create an individual profile for each person in the system, and then we would take the kind of collective data, and we have a data analytics team that's in-house at Bravo that would build out a full report. And that report could be 25 pages long in some cases, depending on what all we're measuring. Again, that's probably for that larger group space where you really want to dig down into that data. It'll pull all different types of ways to slice the data. So it'll slice by age group, by all different types of, by location, by gender. It'll pull out those different types of data points, and that's all being collected by us. But if we're bouncing that off of claims, then we'll just have to work with you to figure out where that data comes from.
All right, awesome. And how would somebody go about getting a quote?
Yeah, I think the first step is, connect with the folks at WeAreWellness. They've been great in allowing us to be part of this today and hosting us on the webinar. So appreciate that, Marcelo and your team. You guys have been awesome. So I would say that would be a big piece to it. Reach out to the folks at WeAreWellness. They'll get you in touch with the team at Bravo. You can always connect with us at sales@bravowell.com. and we'll be happy to kind of put together a quote or give you some pricing. But that would probably be the best way to start.
All right, awesome. That's all the questions we have for today. I do want to remind everybody that you will be receiving a follow-up email from WeAreWellness. It's going to include a recording of this webinar along with the slides. And I just want to thank everybody for attending, and thank you, Brandon, for doing such a great job presenting.
Yeah, thanks, everyone.
All right. Have a great day, everyone. Bye.